Morning, everyone, and welcome to our event this morning on Reimagining the Workplace. I hope you're all having a nice morning, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. My name is Brenton Harris. I'm the MD at Bremer, and I'll be starting us off by providing a brief introduction to Bremer and sharing our view on how digital transformation and the cloud are changing the way organisations work. I'll then hand you over to futurist Guillaume Pierre, who will help us prepare for what the future holds for our workplaces. So thinking back in the early stages of COVID-19, many organisations that already worked in the cloud were able to carry on business as usual and thrive, whereas organisations who didn't work in the cloud played catch up so they could achieve any place working. Fast forward to where we stand now, and productivity and technology initiatives remain a very high priority for many organisations. I'll give you an example of one of these priorities that applies to some of our clients. This example relates to the people who attend site visits in their job, for example, in-home carers or land surveyors. So prior to COVID, many of these people had to go back to a satellite office between their site visits to complete data entry or back office tasks. Now, most of them in the COVID situation go direct from home to site and back to home to complete these sites. And in many cases, this has achieved a productivity benefit for the organisation. And also a work-life benefit for the employee. So a lot of our clients see this as a win-win. So the next step we're now seeing in this example is that many of our clients are looking to expedite enablement of mobility on any device so that their staff who are travelling on site are able to complete these sorts of tasks on site and in that moment, and also access the information that they need in that moment from a device while they're actually out on site. This is just one example of an initiative that we're seeing prioritised, but it is something that we've been pushing for a while. And coming out of COVID, if there's one sort of benefit that we're seeing from an IT side, is it's really good to start seeing some of these types of initiatives gain some extra traction at the moment. So next, I'd like to provide a brief introduction to Bremer. So yeah, Bremer was founded about 15 years ago. Our passion is really to connect the workforce, and most specifically using the Microsoft 365 platform, which is where most of our experience is. Bremer we're both technical people and consultants. We help remove manual processes and bottlenecks, enable your team to access information from anywhere, and also often we help visualize information using dashboards and reports so that's easy to read, intuitive, and helps to aid your decision making. Bremer's guided our education and experience along Microsoft's learning path. So our Microsoft Gold certification is really important to us there. We're essentially a boutique provider because we focus on not-for-profit aged care, engineering and mining services. Typically, most of our clients have between 30 and 1,000 staff. So that's sort of the area that we have most experience with and can help. It's been very important for us to focus on these industries because we've been able to go deep and understand how they work and deliver a tailored solution. Look, we make the biggest difference by working with both the business stakeholders and the IT teams for our clients that have IT teams. In the past, Bremer has had a foundation of managed services support, and that's still a strong part of what Bremer is today. But I think one of the areas that provides particular value to our clients is from a strategy perspective. We assist with business and technology reviews and help to lay out a roadmap to guide our clients' path forward. From there, we do targeted transformation projects, which is mostly revolving around the Microsoft 365 platform, where we help with some of the heavy lifting in getting your business processes automated, workflows in place, things like document management solutions, business analytics, and security. And from there, we help with a really important part, which I'll talk about more in a moment, which is the training and adoption side, for example, helping with lunch and learns and how-to documentation to make sure that your users adopt the systems that are implemented, which is one of the key challenges. One of the learnings we've had over the years is that organizational change is absolutely a requirement to achieve digital change. We've made mistakes in the past, and if there's one that stands out, it'd be years ago coming in with a great tool and finding that tool isn't actually adopted. So a realization we had is certainly that, and we focus very much our services now on making sure that we're focusing on the organizational change to enable that digital change. Now more than ever, it's important to have a strategy of bringing the people, place, and technology together, and just evaluating these three areas cohesively to deliver the productivity benefits and a modern experience overall. We found it can't just be the IT team's responsibility to achieve successful change, and digital transformation can't be forced from the top down. It really needs to be enabled, and the users need to have a part in this, for example, through a proof of concept or a trial or something along those lines, so we can see how the proposed changes are going to actually play out in real life. Our experience to sustain real change is that executive sponsorship is essential, and that digital transformation should be at a part of the center of your corporate strategy. And one tip that we have found useful is to create some sort of simple technology mission statement, which can be shared with your teams, something that resonates with them so they can get on board and understand where you're trying to go to. So with digital transformation, we described 3 different levels. The first one is about getting on the cloud platform. The second is an area that we're particularly interested in, and that is the expanding your adoption of that cloud platform and actually changing the way the organization works. And the third is something we don't have a lot of experience with, which is business model transformation, like what Uber did to the taxi industry. But my point is that all of these 3 levels need to be considered holistically and not just one after the other. So Bremer lead at level 1. We've got a lot of experience there, but our particular interest and impact is at level 2, which is where we actually make a difference to how the workforce works. Just from me, I guess I'd like to just summarize by asking some questions to you relevant to the areas Bremer's involved with, and hopefully this will help you assess what you already have in place from the items I've briefly covered. My first one is do you have a central hub to bring everyone together, from chat, video conferencing, a place to coordinate with your teams in terms of what they're doing and their progress? Or perhaps do you have an intranet? Do you have access to files and data from anywhere on any device? Are your frontline workers integrated into your business process electronically, for example, with forms and apps on their mobile device or tablets? Are your systems integrated so they talk to each other? And can you report centrally on metrics that matter in your organization? And can you use this data to actually make informed decisions? Or is it hidden in a database somewhere where you don't use it very often? So these are the main areas Bremer's passionate about. Thank you for briefly listening to an overview of what matters most to us. I would like to offer a brief complimentary consultation as a thank you for anyone who attends this morning. And through that, we can provide some advice, hopefully, with your path forward, and you'd get a better understanding also, in addition to that, in terms of what Bremer does. Just keep in mind, we have particular knowledge within the industries I mentioned before. Apart from that, please reach out to me if you have any questions. I am here to help, and I'm more than happy to provide any advice or share experience that we have. But aside from that, that's it from me this morning, and I'd like to hand you over to Gihan now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brenton. That's great. So, look, this whole idea of digital transformation is a really big area at the moment. And so what I want to share with you today is some ideas about what the consequences of that digital transformation mean for a lot of us in businesses and in workplaces. So in the rest of the time that we've got together, I'm going to share some ideas around reimagining the workplace. And it's more than just the workplace, as you'll see as we go forward. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. So this is a story about something, a tech company that started in the UK more than half a century ago. So Steve Shirley started this company in the early days of computing, and it was a technology company in the very early days of tech. And there were 3 things that were really interesting about this company. So the first thing was that at the time, most of the tech companies were working in accounting software and financial software, and Steve thought that was quite boring. So this company, Freelance Programmers, was focused very much in high-tech software. So doing things like working with Boeing and working with the US military. So that was a little bit different, but that wasn't the most interesting thing. The second thing that they did was that the company was staffed by mostly women. Now, women did play a really important part in the early days of computing, even though they don't always get the credit for it, but it was still unusual to have a company that was staffed mostly by women. And the third thing about this company was that almost all the staff were working from home. So this is pre-internet, this is pre-NBN, pre-digital transformation, and yet this company, freelance programmers, had a whole bunch of staff who were working from home from around the UK. So what would happen is Royal Mail would collect the mail twice a day and take it down to London. So these women were working on their little cards, which would then go to London to be put into the mainframe overnight. It would go through all its processing, and the next morning it would spit out some results, and whatever changes were required, then they would be sent out to the staff members again, and they would make all the changes. So this was a long time ago, long before internet, long before we thought about the idea of working from home. It was happening. And my point is, if this was happening half a century ago, there's no reason why we can't have that same sort of workplace now. And even if this whole idea of working from home and working from anywhere is new to you, it's not necessarily new to everybody. By the way, the person I've been calling Steve Shirley is in fact named Stephanie Shirley, and I'm not being disrespectful by calling her Steve, because what she used to do in a very male-dominated industry and workplace at the time, when she wanted to have a meeting with potential clients, she'd write a memo and sign her name Steve, so that when she turned up at the meeting and they found out it was a woman, they couldn't turn her away. So Stephanie Shirley, when she floated her company, she became an instant millionaire, as did many of the other original founders. If you want to know more about her story, you can watch her great TED Talk, which you can see here. Why do ambitious women have flat heads? I'm not going to give you the answer to that. You'll have to watch the TED Talk to find out. But it's a really fascinating story. But the point I want to make is that people were doing this half a century ago. So as we're reimagining the workplace now, it may be something that is quite different from what's been mainstream for the last few decades. So today, my 3 rules of engagement for all my presentations are these. So first of all, I'd like you to think. So this is some time for you to think a little bit differently. Also be a bit playful, because I've got some exercises and activities, and somebody's going to get the chance to win a fabulous prize before the top of the hour. But use the chance to engage and interact. So it won't just be one way. We'll have polls, we'll have exercises, activities, and so on as we go through. But also, on a serious note, I do want you to have things that you can take away and put into action at the end of this, so that you can get some practical value out of it. And then I love the work that Bremer does with her digital transformation and helping organizations get there. So wherever you are on that path, there's going to be some practical things you can take away. Thank you. As Brenton said, my name is Gihan Pereira. I'm a futurist. I help organizations get ready for the future, and especially now get ready for an uncertain future. So these are some of the clients that I've worked with, and I picked the clients that I've worked with kind of at leadership level, and just to show that everyone's going through similar things. So a number of industries have been through some significant disruption in the last few years. So we talk about this pandemic as being unprecedented, and it kind of is, but only because it's affecting everybody at the same time. But I've worked with organizations over the last 7, 8, 10 years who in their industries or in their areas of expertise, they're going through massive disruption as well. And you can see here, there's some government, some big corporations, small businesses, some local, some international, and they're all going through this disruption, and some are more agile than others. In fact, just yesterday, I saw one of them, Siemens, that you can see at the top there. Siemens yesterday announced that all their staff around the world will be able to 2 or 3 days a week work away from the office if they choose to, and that's going to be a permanent thing going forward. So some people are being disruptive already in the way that they're looking at disrupting themselves, and we'll talk about that as we go a little bit further. But a little bit of a warning here, and just before we get into, I don't want to make this all about fun and activities and hey, this is all going to be neat. I've got a little bit of a warning because it's serious stuff here, and some businesses and organizations are going to get through it and some aren't. So my first bit of engagement for you is a little bit of a question. So my question for you is, who or what did these companies have in common? So I'm going to share with you these 4 companies here. So one of them is Groupon. So actually, in Australia, Scoopon is bigger. You know, those deal of the day sites. The next one's Slack. So Slack is a few years ago one of the fastest growing companies in the world, and like an office communication tool which is supposed to replace email. Uber, which we all know, ride sharing service, and so much more now. And WhatsApp, the messaging app. So in the chat room, let's see. This is the first bit of audience participation. So I'm just going to ask. So by the way, if you're in your chat, you'll see that there's 2 options. You can say you can send your chat to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. And I'd rather that you choose all panelists and attendees so that everyone sees the things that you're sharing. So what do those 4 companies have in common? So just type in whatever you think they are. So a couple of things that are coming through. You can see disruptors. Yeah, none own a physical product. Interesting. Yep. Digital companies. I was doing this with the leadership team last week, and one of them, somebody in the team said, these are all things that my Gen Z kids can't live without. So tech apps, customer needs. Yep, strong brand, don't have bricks and mortar presence. Yeah, so these are all true, right? These are all true. And the one that Michael said has just said, you can see this in the chat, and I think Michael's, yeah, and Michael shared this to everyone. They all started during a global crisis. So all of these companies started during the global financial crisis. Now in Australia, we were reasonably well protected from that compared to the rest of the world. But in North America and in Europe, it was a big thing. In fact, in the US, they called that the Great Recession, the GFC. And all these companies were founded during the Great Recession, during the GFC. And I'm sharing this with you, not because I'm trying to motivate you and go, if they can do it, you can, rah, rah, rah. That's not my point. The point is this, that in times of crisis, it's actually easier to be a disruptor. It's easier to disrupt because everything's been disrupted anyway. So customers are looking for new ways of dealing with businesses. Employees are looking for new ways to work, and maybe new work, and even in the same work, different things from their organization, from their workplaces. And so in a lot of ways, it's easier to disrupt now. It's like when you've got a crack in your windscreen because it's hit by a stone. It's not that first stone that's a danger. The real danger is driving around with a cracked windscreen, because a second stone can shatter it because it's already weakened. And I think that's what we're facing now. And so we thought very carefully about what we'd call this presentation, and we're calling it Reimagining the Workplace, because a lot of this is use your imagination to look at what the workplace of the future might look like. And you might walk out of this presentation today with more questions than answers. And if that's the case, that's good. Then we'd have achieved our goal, because I do want you to have questions rather than walking out and going, yep, I know, we're on the right track, everything's tickety-boo, we're going to go, okay. It's not necessarily. You might be sideswiped by some disruptor from elsewhere, because everyone is being disrupted. Everyone is looking for creative ways to meet that disruption and to find other opportunities. Okay, so that's the preamble out of the way. So again, as I said, I want to make this engaging and interactive. So I've got a puzzle for you, and it's a puzzle that's going to relate to our future, but let's not worry about that at the moment. Let me share the puzzle with you. So there are 4 cards here, and the way the cards work, let me explain it to you. So every card has a picture on the front, so you can see a fish and a dragon, and it has a solid color on the back. So you can see a red and a yellow. Okay, so we've got these 4 cards and a picture on the front, a solid color on the back. And my question to you is, if I make this statement that every red back card has a dragon on the front, I'd like you to tell me whether it's true or false. Now, that's actually not the question. So I'm not going to ask you whether it's true or false, because I think some of you have already figured out that you don't have enough information yet to be able to tell me for sure whether it's true or false. You need to turn over some of the cards to be sure. So my question for you is, you could obviously turn them all over, and then you'd know for sure. So you could definitely turn over 1, 2, 3, 4, but you don't need to turn them all over. So my question for you, the real question, is which cards must you turn over to be able to tell me for sure whether this is true or false? So in the chat room, if you can type in, so if you think that it's all of them, then type in 1, 2, 3, 4, even though I've told you that's not it. But whatever combination of cards you think you need to turn over, type them in the chat room and we'll see what people are saying. All right, so let's see what people are saying here. I can see that, okay, at least one person's got the right answer already. Yeah, okay, I can see a number of answers coming through. I think so far only one person's got the right answer. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so let me share this with you, right? So let me share first of all, let me share the easy ones, right? So the easy ones, there's 2 easy cards to guess, and most people would guess this, that you do need to turn over number 1, because you need to see whether there's a dragon on the back. The second easy one is that you don't need to turn over number 3, because it doesn't have a red back, so it doesn't matter what's on the other side. You also don't need to turn over number 4, because if it's got a red back, then it doesn't give you any extra information. And if it's got a yellow, blue, black, whatever back, then it becomes irrelevant like number 3. You do need to turn over number 2 though, because if it's got a red back, then the statement's false. Okay, so the correct answer is 1 and 2. And I saw that Casey and maybe other people later got that right answer. When I speak at conferences and I ask this to groups of hundreds of people, and I ask how many people got this right, usually only a few people put up their hands. And this is why. Because most people get number 1, but they don't get number 2, because there's no back, there's no red, and there's no dragon that they can see on number 2. And I think when we're looking at our future, there are 2 kinds of futures, and they're a bit like this. And number 1 is a future that you can see, and even if it's challenging, at least you can see it so you can plan for it. But the second kind is like number 2. It's a future that you can't see, and so we've got to be nimble and agile and flexible and still be willing to work with uncertainty to be able to get to that future. And some people find that really uncomfortable. Even if they're good at meeting challenges, when they can't see the future, it's not always easy. Now, there's some people who do great at that. A very good friend of mine, he thrives in chaos because he's always seeing opportunities there. But for most people, and I shouldn't say most, but for many people, it's quite difficult to operate in uncertainty. So I've got a bit of a poll here. So we've got a couple of polls as we're going to run through this today through our presentation. So what I'd like you to do, and let me do this for you, let me help you out here. To do the poll, I'm just going to share in the chat room here the link to the poll, and so just open up a web browser window, and you can go to the address on the slide here, or you can do it in the, just click it in the chat room. So it's t.ly/poll. Okay, so when you do that, what you'll see is that we'll switch over to the poll window. Okay, and you'll see it there, and all you've got to do is respond to the poll. So you'll see it coming up there, and so you'll see there's 4 questions in the poll, as you can see there. So one is about you. How well do you operate when there's like a challenging situation? And then how well do you operate in uncertainty? The same thing for your team or your organization. How well do they operate when they've got a known future, even if it's uncertain? And how well do they operate when the future's future's known and certain, as opposed to uncertain? So let's see what, and it'll be interesting to see how this compares to other groups that I work with. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I'll keep the poll open for a few more seconds as people are voting. Okay, so, and then we'll see the results. Okay, as you can see here, so most people operate better when the future is certain, even if it's challenging, they operate well under those circumstances. And it's not surprising because most of us like that certainty, and it's not easy to operate in uncertainty. So I'm going to give you a couple of strategies about operating in uncertainty as we think about what that workplace of the future is going to look like. Okay, thanks everyone for playing along with that. Let me continue here. So as we're talking about the future, just keep in mind, let me move on past the poll, I'm going to talk about three things here. We're talking about the reimagining the workplace, but as you see, it's more than just the workplace. It'll be a lot more than that. But the first thing I want to do, because there's a lot of conversation at the moment about what the workplace of the future is going to look like, let's talk about that first. And then we'll talk about a little bit, talk about planning. And then last, we'll talk about people, not because people are the least important, in fact, they're the most important, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about your people in today's session. I'd rather talk about what the future might look like, and then how are you going to lead your people, and how are your people going to help work towards that future. We should really start with planning. I want to talk about the workplace first, so I can give you a big picture around it, so it'll make more sense when you start thinking about your planning. Okay, with all of this, I just want to say, don't look for things to be perfect. Don't aim for perfection. So you're planning at the moment, when you're looking at this future, especially an uncertain future, you might think metaphorically, it's a little bit like a kid's drawing, because all the long-term plans have been thrown away. So you want to do better planning, but you don't have to be perfect. You're not trying to create a masterpiece at this stage. What you're trying to do is create something kind of halfway along that's okay at the moment, but you've got to be willing to switch plans when things change, and things are changing fast around us, so be ready for that. Okay, so let's talk about what that workplace of the future might look like. And this is seriously talking about, specifically talking about the workplace, but what are the consequences of that? So there are three parts to this, and the first one is the really obvious one, which is where people are going to be working. And there's been a lot of conversation about working from home versus working from the office. I want to expand your thinking a little bit around that. But also, what does that mean? And Brenton and Bremer will know this, that with any sort of, once you create the infrastructure about the where, then you can ask interesting questions also about when and who. So those are the three things that we're going to look at in this section. And then the first one's around where. So this is something that I've been obsessed with for a long time, and trying to encourage people to think about the fact that the office doesn't have to be the standard place where people work. It has been for the last 200 years, because that's where the files were, that's where the secretarial staff were, that's where your team were, and that was the only option. But for a long time, I've been pushing this, and this is for me about 15 years ago, when I used to one day a week go and sit by the river. People from Perth, who you might recognize this, in Matilda Bay in Netherlands, take my laptop and work there one day a week. And it was such a novel idea at the time that somebody from the local, a journalist from the local newspaper who was walking by, he saw me do this, came up and had a chat. He said, can I take a photo and write an article for you, about you, in our local newspaper? So it was pretty novel at the time. But I've been pushing this for a while. Even 10 years ago, my friend Chris Putney and I wrote this book, Out of Office, which was for employees to encourage the employer that they could work just as effectively when they were away from the office. And the key to this was it just wasn't just working from home. Even though the conversation now has been, recently has been about working from home, think a bit broader than just working from the office or working from home. Those might be the only two options available now while we're still battling and grappling with this pandemic. But really, it's all about working from virtually anywhere, and it doesn't have to be the office. So if you think about some of the non-office workplaces of the future, of course, we're going to have people who want to work from home. We're going to have people who want to work from cafes, people who want to work from, when travel starts again, airline lounges, or co-working spaces, which is a new concept that's sprung up as a result of what's happened in the last decade or so, or serviced offices. Maybe they're even working illegally from their car. But why does it have to be illegal? It is at the moment, but in the future, it doesn't have to be, because when we have self-driving autonomous cars, one of your workplaces might be that you're working in the car while you're trying to go from A to B. And even during this pandemic, The research that's been done in the last few months says that organizations are already realizing the benefits of their people working from home. And 3/4 of them, according to Gartner, are already thinking about allowing people to do remote work, like a work away from the office. PwC, a similar sort of thing. Again, research that was done recently, so the last few months. And again, I just keep wanting to make this point that it's not only about working from home or the office, it's about working from anywhere. Microsoft, for example, pre-pandemic, in the US, they support their team members working from co-working spaces. So they say, if you don't want to come to the office in Seattle, then you can work from home or you can work in a co-working space and we will pay the membership of your co-working space for you. Because for two reasons. One is they reduce the costs of the expensive office infrastructure if there are fewer people in the office. But the second reason is that they've now got Microsoft team members, Microsoft staff, who are hanging around every day with people from different businesses, different industries, even other Microsoft customers using Microsoft software in the co-working space. So Microsoft sees that it doesn't reduce innovation. In some ways, it actually increases innovation. And it's not only true for the employer side, it's true for employees as well. So for a long time, the last decade, employees have kind of been pushing for the idea that they can work away from the office. But even through COVID-19, some employees who've never worked from home before are now seeing the opportunity to do that, and they want to. They want to work remotely more frequently than they did before COVID-19. And again, all the research is saying that, and even during a pandemic, productivity has gone up rather than down when people are working from home. Okay, so that's the first thing. The first thing is where people work. So what's the workplace of the future going to look like? It's going to be the office, the home, co-working spaces, anywhere. The second thing is that once you get past the whole idea that everyone has to come into the office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, daily commute, then you might think about what are working hours. And there's been a lot of conversation about that recently in the mainstream about what do working hours mean now. And there's been some conversation about the 4-day week, even pre-pandemic. There's another, by coincidence, there's another Microsoft example here. Microsoft in Japan, before the pandemic, they allowed their sales staff to work from home, to work a 4-day week and have a day off. It didn't mean they had to work longer each day. They were just allowed to work a 4-day week, so reduced working hours. And what they found was that not only did productivity not go down, performance actually went up. So they found that sales actually went up by 40%. And there are a number of reasons for that, but a couple of them, which will now be familiar to us in the last few months, were because work just became more efficient. So they said no meeting can be longer than 30 minutes. So forget about all the friction that goes along with meetings, forget about all the waste of time. We won't have anything longer than 30 minutes, and we're going to have more online meetings because they're more efficient. So these are significant bottom line results as a result of creating a shorter working week. Across the ditch in New Zealand in 2018, Perpetual Guardian did the same thing. They offered their staff as an experiment, which now turned into a permanent thing, a 4-day week. And again, just work 4 days and get all your work done in 4 days. And they found from the other side of it, from employee well-being, they had a lot of benefits, lower stress, better work-life satisfaction, and also better work-life integration. As you can imagine, if people had 1 weekday off a week to spend with their family and to do other things. The third area is then who is part of your team. So this is a little bit more radical, but traditionally the team has been the people who can come into the office or within commuting distance of your office. But as soon as we create that infrastructure that allows people to work from home, it's also created the infrastructure for them to work from anywhere. So what are some of the options for the future? Well, you don't have to work in a city anymore. So like I live in Perth, world's best city, I think, even though I'm biased, but no, it can take people from anywhere around the country. In fact, there's going to be a growth of teams who have regional office staff. We talk about knowledge workers here who could otherwise work in an office. They may have moved to the regions because for a sea change or a tree change or a COVID change, which is also something that's happening, or there are smart people in the regions who don't want to move away from them, and they can be part of your team as well. And by the way, there's a myth that people are moving away from the regions and into the cities. In the last 5 years in Australia, it's actually the other way around. People are moving away from the cities. The net migration is to the regions, not to the cities. So there's this huge workforce that's available there. And then think about going global as well. It's an obvious thing now when we don't have travel internationally, but you can have people who are part of your team who are working from other countries. And now the biggest barrier might not be distance, but it might be time zone. You can also bring in people as you need them. So you can bring in experts to join your team for a short time, if maybe for a week, a month, a couple of hours even, and they can zoom in for as long as they need to. Now, this is something that companies have been doing for decades. It just hasn't been mainstream and accepted until the last few months. And the last one is this idea of lost talent. So people who, for whatever reason, they don't want to be part of this Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 daily commute. So a couple of examples. So there's some, say, smart, savvy professional women who've stepped out of the workforce because they want for maternity leave and they want to come back into it, but they don't necessarily want to come back full time. Maybe they want to work 2 or 3 days a week and maybe during school hours. And they might be lost to you if you don't allow them to come back into the team. And now we've got the capability to do that. What about somebody who's left because their partner relocated to a different state and the whole family left and you've lost them? But again, if you allow them to be part of your team and you think broader, then it creates new opportunities for you for the workforce of the future because their workplace might be different. Just a couple of personal examples. So as a conference speaker, so I'm not speaking at many conferences in person now, doing a lot of the work online, but in April next year, I'm booked to speak at a conference in Dunedin. And for me, living in Perth, to get to Dunedin door to door, actually it's not even door to door, it's airplane door to airplane door. It's 14 hours to get there. I'll be there for 2 days on the ground and then 14 hours to get back again for me to speak for 2 hours at this conference. Now, I'm not saying conferences are going to go away. They're not. They'll definitely be there, and especially as people want to connect again. But there are now other ways for people to bring in experts into their work. And there could be external experts like me, but there could also be internal experts. There may be somebody in your company who's interstate, and instead of flying them over, you bring them in on a Zoom call or a Teams meeting. In fact, this may not be new to you, but it is to a lot of people. Another example, so I'm doing some work with a client in Townsville, and again, instead of flying me over, what she got me to do in June was to do some work with her leadership team around their strategic planning, because they're doing their 5-year plan and they wanted the futurist view first. But then over the next 3 months, she's got me dropping into her, so that was with her senior leadership team, but every month she's got a monthly town hall with everybody, and I'm dropping in to do a shorter presentation each month. Now, even if we didn't have travel restrictions, there's no way we would have done that. It just is cost prohibitive, it's logistically prohibitive to get me back every month. But this way, because she was creative about how to make this work, she could include me in her workforce because she was reimagining her workplace to be something quite different. And again, it's not only about external experts, you've got other people in your team that you could bring in a different way, in a creative way. So I'm going to stop for questions soon. But before I do that, just one last thing about the language that you use when you talk about remote or virtual teams. I've heard people say, these are virtual team members. I don't like that. It seems like they're ghosts, or these are remote team members, and that makes them sound like second-class citizens. And again, I don't want that to be the case. I'd rather that you start using at least have the mindset that this is a distributed team. So everyone's equal. Some are in the office, some are at home, some are in a co-working space, some are working overseas as part of our global team. Some of them are traveling, but they're all equal because they're part of our whole team. And whether you actually use the word distributed team or not, at least have the mindset that this is our distributed team. Okay, I'm just going to quickly stop and just check if anyone's got any questions or comments. If you've got questions, type them in the chat, and then we'll move on to the second area. I'd rather use the chat rather than the Q&A, because then everyone can see the questions as well. And we'll stop again a little bit later as well for other questions. And if you haven't got any questions now, but something strikes you later, that's okay. As I said, my goal here is to actually ask more questions and answer them. I'll give you contact details later so that you can ask me questions if you want to. But mostly what I want to do is actually ask you interesting questions for you to have things to go, that's interesting, to take away. Okay, so don't see any coming in, which is fine. So let me continue here. So I want to talk about this second area, which is, I think, a really important one now, and we saw this earlier in the poll. We're looking at planning for the future, and given that we're talking about workplace for the future, let's talk about talent planning. So what's your plan, not for the whole organization, but in terms of your talent, your teams, in terms of your workplace? And the thing is that there's a lot of research coming out now. Some of it you may have seen already. Already, the last few months, they're leading organizations producing a lot of research about talent and leadership and HR and these sort of things are coming out now. So you may have seen some of these. Let me actually make that a bit bigger so you can see some of the reports that are actually coming out now. How do we prepare for and manage this recession that we're in? How do we manage working from economic downturns? How do we manage working from different workplaces and so on? And so all of this sort of research is coming out now. And in addition to that, there's a whole bunch of other research pre-pandemic about what's happening with talent. So Mercer has published their annual talent trends. Aon Hewitt's done this, the World Economic Forum, KPMG, PwC, EY. So the point is, there's a whole bunch of stuff that if you're a leader and or if you're in HR, there's a whole bunch of things to think about when you're thinking about leadership and talent. And so how do you prepare for this? Like, how do you really get ready for this future that in some places we can't even predict? And so one of those pieces of research came out from KPMG. You can download this, so you can Google this KPMG keeping us up at night 2020. At the start of every year, for the last 3 years, KPMG have done this research into surveyed Australian CEOs, what are their top 10 issues. And even before the pandemic, digital transformation was number one. The top three were this: digital transformation, then things like the global environment, and then regulation. And what COVID-19 has done is accelerated that first one. The digital transformation now, a whole bunch of organizations had to scramble to make that work so that they could allow their people to work from home. Also, a whole bunch of other things like online ordering and omni-channel retail and a whole bunch of other things. But for today, it's about what's happened with digital transformation, which is, people who work with Bremer, you know, if you might be on top of this already. But for many organizations, it was a frantic crisis when they had to implement this so they could actually keep the lights on and keep work going through this pandemic. So here's what happens with organizations when they're in crisis. They go through 3 phases. So first of all, they're in crisis. And then they recover from the crisis. So there's a recovery phase, and that might take a bit longer than the crisis usually does. And then they start thinking about growth. And what happens is there's a difference between what good organizations do, what the better ones do, and what the best ones do. So good organizations in crisis, well, actually everyone in crisis, they're just reactive. They throw away their long-term plans, and they just have to react because you just have to keep your head above water. And then the good organizations in recovery, they start being responsive. So they're looking around at the world and they're making their plans. The plans might still be relatively short-term at this stage because that's all they can see at this stage. They can't necessarily see long-term. And then when they're back to where they were, they can become, they're proactive and they're thinking about growth. And the best organizations actually go one step further and they're disruptive as well. And let me just demonstrate this to you in the context of the workplace. So let me just do this for you. So in terms of the workplace, if I can just jump into this. So let's think about what happens with organizations when they're thinking about the workplace. So when the crisis hit, and we're talking about office workers here, we had this whole, everyone became really reactive and they went to working from home. And then what happened was, when they started the recovery, they started to become responsive, and they started thinking about their return to office strategy as they were able to come back into the office. And they're doing this at different stages, different speeds, of course. And then there are organizations who are already thinking about how can we have this working from anywhere culture. So how do we be proactive? And now the thing is, as I said, so the way that what good organizations do is they go through this process step by step by step. So first they're reactive, then they go return to office, and then when they feel like it's safe to get back to where things were, then they start thinking about working from anywhere. The better organizations, they're proactive even now while they're coming through recovery. The best organizations, they're already looking ahead and saying, how can we be disruptive? And this is not disrupting the whole industry, it's how can we disrupt ourselves? And when we talk about workplace, how do we build these fluid teams? So that's what I was talking about. The fluid teams are the ones where they can work from anywhere. The team can come from anywhere. They're not always the same team members working together. Their working hours might be different. There's still collaboration and innovation, but they're thinking about how can we make our teams fluid? And the good thing about this is that you don't have to go through these other three stages. So I'm working with clients. The clients with the most foresight are already thinking about how do we create these fluid teams now so that we're ready after recovery and when we're thinking about growth. So they're already thinking about how do we create these fluid teams. Many organizations, I would say most organizations, are not yet thinking that way. But the best ones are. The best ones are thinking fluid. And if you don't necessarily have to go that way, you may start thinking about working from anywhere now, especially if you've done the digital transformation that enables working from home. Okay, so just a thing to think about is that if you're not already, at least have the seed of an idea in your mind, that think about working from anywhere, and maybe even think about this idea of these fluid teams. Okay, so let me just switch back to this. And what we're going to do is, I've got our second poll here. Okay, so the second poll is about your future talent planning. And what you'll see, let me get that poll ready. If you go to exactly the same place that we did last time, but let me move on. Okay, so let me go to the chat room. In case you don't have that still open, let me paste that link in again. And what you find, if you still have it open, it'll have jumped ahead to this poll. And so the question is this: of these four stages, where are you at the moment? Are you reactive, responsive, proactive, or thinking, yeah, now's the time to shake things up? All right, great. Okay, it's interesting to see. Yes, a lot of people are already proactive, and so when I run this poll, I've run this over the last few months, and it's interesting to see. So 3 months ago, not surprisingly, many people were saying that we're in crisis and we need to manage the crisis. And if you're in the situation, by the way, then I think, no, don't think about being disruptive or proactive. If you're in crisis, that's the most important thing at the moment. But it's if you're coming out of the crisis and into recovery, then do think about being proactive and maybe even being disruptive. Okay, good. Okay, so let's have a look. So most people here are saying that they're responsive or proactive, and that's pretty typical at this stage. I'm glad to see that there are, like there's some people who are already thinking we need to be disruptive now, because I think that's going to be the case. And as I said earlier, that other people are going to be disrupting, whether you like it or not. So unfortunately or fortunately, you do need to be somewhat disruptive. Okay, so what do you do? So I want to give you a really practical thing that you can do to start thinking differently, especially when you're thinking about managing uncertainty. So the way we're going to do this is, as I said at the start, there's a fabulous prize. And so some person here is going to be the lucky person who's going to win this fabulous prize. To win the fabulous prize, if you'd like to be the person who has the opportunity to win this fabulous prize, which is a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, then just type in yes in the chat box or volunteer, and I'll be the first one. So Liz is the first person to say yes. So thank you everyone for saying yes, but I've got Liz, Ross Bryant, I think. So great. So Liz is going to be the person. So just for everyone else, don't type in the chat box yet. I'll give you the chance to do that. But for Liz, So you got the opportunity to win this prize, my fabulous book, Disruption by Design. And the way you're going to do it is we're going to work a little bit at it. It's difficult work. And the way it works is I'm going to give you the chance to win the prize, but it's in one of these 3 boxes. And I'm going to give you 2 chances to guess which box it's in. But we're going to do it in a very specific way. Okay, so first of all, there are those 3 boxes. The prize is in one of those 3 boxes, Liz. Which box, 1, 2, or 3, do you think the prize is in? So just take a random guess to start with. And so Liz goes in number 1. Okay, interesting. Interesting. Okay, so just let's make a note of that. So Liz thinks that the prize is in box 1. Okay, Liz, so the next thing is I'm going to tell you, before you make your second guess, that it's not in box 2. Okay, so you can see it's not in box 2. So your second guess is, do you want to stay with your original choice, or do you want to switch to box 3? Do you want to stay or switch? Okay, so let's see what Liz says. Liz says stay. Okay, let's ask the audience. Okay, so audience, so Liz has chosen number 1 randomly and taken away number 2, and I'm going to say, do you want to switch or stay? So just type in, do you want to switch or stay? So just go switch or stay, and let's see what people are saying. So some people are still responding to our panelists, which is okay. So that everyone's saying, oh, it's interesting. It's about 50-50. So the people who are saying switch or stay. Okay, the answers have stopped coming in there. So I reckon it's about 50-50. Have you been swayed by the audience? Do you want to switch to number 3, or do you want to stay? So Liz, again, I'm asking you. Okay, let's still going to say stay. Okay, so yeah, so it's a pity you didn't switch, Liz, because the prize was in box number 3. But thank you for being a good sport. Thank you for playing. So you'll get a copy of the book. And by the way, so for everybody else who's disappointed that they didn't win this fabulous prize, you may have noticed that when we announced this webinar, we said that everyone will get a copy of the book. So we will send out a copy of the book to everyone. So don't feel too depressed just at the moment. But let me explain the logic behind this and the decision making. So the first thing is, there's definitely some element of luck in this, right? I think you'll agree with that. You'll agree that you might get it wrong regardless of what you do. So let's look at the 3 scenarios. So Liz chose number 1, and she chose to stay with number 1 with her second choice. Now, I hope you'll agree that if you choose to stay, then your chance of winning is 1 in 3. So it's 1 in 3 when you start, and then whatever I do, I could take boxes away, I could add boxes, I could dance a jig. It doesn't matter. If you choose to stay, your chance of winning is 1 in 3. Okay, I hope you get that. So the only interesting thing is what happens if you choose to switch. So let's see what happens there, right? So the prize, you don't know this, but it could be in any of the 3 boxes. If the prize was in box 3, which it was, okay, then if you switch to box 2, sorry, if the prize was in box 3, I would have to show box 2 empty, and then switching would win. If the prize was in box 2, again, I'd have to show that box 3 was empty, and again, switching would win. If the prize was in box 1, then I could take away either of the 2 other boxes, and then switching would lose. Okay, so can you see there that in this case, the way I've described this, you don't know where it is, but switching wins 2 out of 3 times. So in fact, switching doubles your chances of winning, because if you stay, it's 1 in 3. If you switch, it's 2 in 3. Okay, this is known as the Monty Hall problem. So Monty Hall was this game show host in the US, and he used to do exactly this. And what he would do was every week on TV, he used to have this game show, and it'd be televised, and like he didn't have fabulous prizes like my book, Disruption by Design. Every week he used to give away a car. And he'd have these 3 doors. Behind one of them was a car, the other 2 were empty. Somebody would win the chance to come up on stage and play the game with him. And he'd do exactly this. Choose a door, he'd open an empty door and say, do you want to stay or switch? And this was before social media, of course, but people were writing into the newspapers, mathematicians were writing in saying, he should switch because he's twice as likely to win, but most people would choose to stay. And the three reasons for that. One is they said, I've already made my choice, I'm not going to change it. And the second is that they said, it's actually not going to make any difference because you can always open an empty door, so actually nothing changes. And the third reason was that they'd regret if they'd chosen the correct door first and then they switched away from it, they'd lose something. Now, the point of this whole thing is that in some cases, so what I've done in this exercise is by taking away an empty box, I've given you more information. So now you can make a different decision. And this is going to happen a lot when we're, especially now when there's so much uncertainty. Don't automatically say, I'm just going to stay with my original decision. Sometimes it's the right thing to do, sometimes it's not. And the way I did this was a bit unfair because I didn't give you enough time to work out the odds. So I'm not saying that anyone would, like everyone's done for staying, everyone has said stay is done. It's not that, but just be willing to change. Be willing to take some action. And then if things have changed around you, then maybe you need to change your strategy as well. So put things out there, but be willing to make changes if you need to. As Maya Angelou said, do stuff. And she says, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. So that's a really important thing to do, is to try stuff. And now, especially in uncertainty, but be willing to change. So have a backup plan, have a plan B and C. So whenever I work with leadership teams, I say, let's work on a plan with strategic planning. I say, what's your plan A? And let's have a plan B and C and know when we need to switch to plan B or C. Okay, so that's a Monty Hall thing. Let me just see if there's any questions or comments. I usually get people who, I often get people who don't agree with me about Monty Hall, but if you have any questions about that or you want to argue about it with me later, just search Monty Hall problem online. There are even online simulators where you can try this out and see the logic and see it in practice. Okay, the third area, just before we finish up, is talking about people. And as I said, this is not because they're not important, they're very important, but I just want to share one idea around this as we're thinking about the workplace of the future. This is pre-pandemic. This research done by Sage People says that most people want to be trusted when, where, and how they work. And this has become especially important when people are working from home or working away from the office. It's amazing the number of clients that I've spoken to the last few months who said, wow, it's just amazing what's happened to productivity when people are working from home. Not only has it not fallen, it's actually gone up. So I don't want to spend a lot of time in this area because I run a whole workshop in this whole how do you make this workplace of the future work. But I want to share one idea, which is from this book, David Marquette, who was a commander of a US nuclear submarine. And he wrote this book, Turn the Ship Around, which is all about, you can imagine, nuclear submarine in the US Navy, very command and control, top-down hierarchical. And he tells this story, this 12-month story of how he turned followers into leaders themselves. And you may have heard, the number one job of a leader is to create more leaders. So one principle that Marquette taught is to give people more authority. And the way he put it was this: push authority to information. So you've got people who've got the information, they've got the skills and the expertise to do their job, do their tasks. Maybe they just don't have the authority to do that. Now you can't just flick a switch and say, I'm going to give you authority to do that, because that's irresponsible. So there's a process in doing that, but at least have that as a mindset of saying, how can I give this person more authority? Because that means that they'll do their job better and I won't be so much of a bottleneck. Okay, so we talked about these three things. We talked about the workplace of the future. We talked about your planning and whether you're willing to be proactive and disruptive if it's appropriate. And I gave you one idea around managing people as we're talking about, as we're reimagining this workplace of the future. So I just want to finish up with two quotations. And one of them is about heart. So one's about the heart, the other one's about the head. So the one about the heart is this, that this is very much a people thing. So even though we're talking about workplace and digital transformation, Brenton mentioned this as well at the start, it's not about the technology that's important for the infrastructure, but it's more about the people and people engaging with the technology. And I love this, that Ian McLaren said this: be kind, because everybody you meet is fighting a difficult battle that maybe you know nothing about. And especially now, You hear people say we're all in the same boat, and I don't think that's true. I think we're all in the same storm, but we've each got our own little boats that we're trying to navigate through that storm. And you don't really know what battle somebody else is going through. So be kind and be empathetic. And the second thing, and this is my last message, is that you just never know stuff until you actually put it into practice. So here's another quotation from the 19th century, and this is from Benjamin Brewster. And he said this: in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. So if you've got some ideas from today, from my session, if you've got some insights from Brenton's session that you want to take advantage of his offer of the complimentary consulting session, if you've got some ideas, put them into practice, because it's only when you put them into practice that you'll find out how practical they are and how usable they are and how well they'll work for you. So thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for playing along and participating. It's I hope you got some ideas, but as I said, the most important thing from our 2 sessions is to now take those ideas away and put them into practice. Thanks everyone. Stay safe and healthy and have a great day.